Welcome back to Disturbed Reality. The violence that occurred on May the 7th, 2025 was a part of a broader surge that began earlier in the week, with confrontations erupting across key municipalities including Culiacan, Navolato, Gamuchil, Mocorito, and Esquinapa. These incidents involved heavily armed convoys, road blockades, and open gunfights, leading to widespread panic and the closure of schools and businesses. This spike in violence is rooted in the ongoing power struggle within the Sinaloa Cartel, primarily between the factions led by the sons of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, known as Los Chapitos, and those loyal to Mayo Zambada, or more specifically his son, El Mayito Flaco. The conflict intensified following Zambada's controversial arrest in July of 2024, allegedly orchestrated by Los Chapitos, leading to a series of retaliatory attacks and a breakdown of the previously maintained Pax Narco. Since the onset of this internal conflict in September of 2024, Sinaloa has witnessed over 1,200 homicides and 1,300 disappearances. The violence has also led to the destruction of infrastructure, including the desecration of mausoleums belonging to rival cartel families, and has severely impacted the local economy, with businesses reporting over $1 billion in losses due to closures and decreased tourism. The violence was allegedly orchestrated by La Mayiza sicarios. They rushed municipalities under Los Chapitos' control and killed various members loyal to the sons of El Chapo. The war, which has been ongoing since September of 2024, seems to be going in the favour of La Mayiza right now. Los Chapitos truly have their backs against the wall. Not only are they facing severe pressure from La Mayiza, but also from law enforcement, with several high-ranking Los Chapito capos being captured in recent months, including names such as Jose Angel Canobio Inzunza, El Garito, who was a key figure on both the logistical and financial sides of Los Chapitos. 2025 marks the closest we have ever been to the end of the Sinaloa Cartel. In fact, one could say there isn't really such a thing as the Sinaloa Cartel anymore, much like with the Gulf Cartel in present day. The Sinaloa Cartel are no longer a unified organisation, and back in the day, during their golden years from the late 90s to the late 2000s, the Sinaloan Federation were not an organisation with a vertical leadership structure. In fact, it was a horizontal leadership structure which differentiated them from rival cartels in Mexico, as well as other criminal organisations across the West. The Sinaloan Federation during that time period is rarely given due credit for its unique leadership structure that somewhat mimics that of the Chinese triads. From the late 1990s to the late 2000s, the Sinaloa Cartel operated under a horizontal leadership structure, meaning power was distributed among several key figures rather than concentrated in a single leader. This structure helped the organisation remain resilient to law enforcement pressure. The cartel was primarily led by a coalition that included Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, Ismael Zambada, Arturo Beltran Leyva, Ignacio Coronel, Juan Garcia Abregu, El Guero Palma, as well as others. Each leader controlled specific territories, operations, or trafficking routes, and while collaboration occurred, each retained a degree of autonomy. The decentralized model allowed the cartel to adapt quickly, recover from arrests or assassinations, and maintain control over its drug trafficking empire. Its leadership structure also allowed Sinaloa to outgrow their early rivals, such as the Tijuana and Juarez cartels, both of which were top-down, vertical hierarchies. However, the issue with such an organisational structure is that everyone has to be on the same page and willing to collaborate to maintain a smooth operation, and you could argue that one man started the domino effect that has gone on to eventually disrupt the Sinaloa Cartel, turning it into the free-for-all that we see today, that man being El Chapo. The thing with Chapo, despite his success at the top of the Sinaloan Federation, his means to get to the top and garner influence was more to serve his own interests rather than that of the organisation itself. We can point to various examples, one being his alleged betrayal of the Beltran-Leyva brothers, which caused the BLO vs Sinaloa War in 2008. At the time, Arturo Beltran-Leyva, leader of the BLO, was arguably the most successful trafficker in the entire Sinaloan Federation. El Jefe de Jefes was pushing more weight than anyone. He and his brother's influence was growing, and many speculate that Chapo was always wary when others in the organisation got too big, possibly viewing them as a threat to his own standing. The story goes that El Chapo turned in the brother of Arturo, Alfredo Beltran-Leyva, to the police, which would kickstart the war between the BLO and the Sinaloa Cartel. Chapo also had the superpower of being a master networker. When such internal strife occurred, Chapo always managed to get the support of other Sinaloan bosses, such as Ismael Zambada, who would always seemingly take his side. The Beltran-Leyva brothers were not the only ones within the Sinaloa Cartel that Chapo allegedly betrayed. Another would be Ignacio Nacho Coronel, who, incidentally, Chapo would go on to marry Nacho Coronel's niece. Now, Nacho Coronel was dubbed the King of Crystal. He was the first capo within the Sinaloa Cartel who started to move synthetic drugs. Following the Milenio Cartel's defeat to La Familia Michoacana in a brutal turf war in the early 2000s, the Milenio organization, led by the Valencia family, were kicked out of Michoacan state and would go on to relocate to Jalisco. Having lost their home territory, they also lost drug routes and most of their power. So cap in hand, they had to go to the Sinaloa Cartel to essentially work under them. They basically became a part of the Sinaloa umbrella. Managing the Milenio organization was Nacho Coronel, and it was through this partnership when Nacho became involved in synthetic drugs, as the Milenio organization were one of few in Mexico at the time who dealt with such substances, mainly crystal meth. Using the expertise of the Milenio Cartel, Nacho became the top crystal pusher in Mexico, moving drugs as far as Europe, using a faction of the Milenio organization known as Los Queenies, ran by Abigail Valencia, El Mencho's brother-in-law and best friend. Throughout the 2000s, Nacho Coronel grew in stature, finances, and influence due to the lack of competition in the synthetics market. In fact, he grew so much that he created and financed a paramilitary group that would take the fight to Los Zetas. This group would be known as Los Matazetas, the Zeta Killers in English. The Matazetas formed in 2009, making their first public appearance in June of that year in Cancun. They left 3 corpses of Zeta soldiers in public with the following message: "We are the new group, Matazetas, and we are against kidnapping and extortion, and we will fight them in all states for a cleaner Mexico." Make no mistake, this was the Matazetas' MO, and throughout 2009 they conducted several successful hits on the Zetas, so much so that reprisal attacks against Coronel would occur, resulting in the deaths of several of his family members, including his 16-year-old son, Alejandro, who was kidnapped, tortured and murdered by the Zetas. By 2010, Nacho had become incredibly powerful. At this point, he was one of the top leaders within the Sinaloa Cartel, which, according to some, worried El Chapo. He saw the Matazetas' effectiveness, he saw the growing influence, and it said that he didn't trust Coronel, suspecting that he was about to go it alone with his new Milenio buddies and separate from the Sinaloa Cartel. Coronel was killed on the 29th of July 2010 in Zapopan, Jalisco, during a shootout with the Mexican army. During the raid, Coronel killed a soldier and wounded another. Sometime during the shootout, Coronel was fatally shot in the head, which killed him instantly. A statement from the Federal Attorney's General Office says soldiers found jewellery, luxury watches, guns, 2 hand grenades, 3 vehicles, and $7 million in cash in the house where Coronel was killed. Many suspect that El Chapo was the one who gave up Coronel's position to get him out of the way. Many theorize that Chapo didn't appreciate that, unlike most other CDS capos, Nacho was not a Sinaloan native. He was actually from Durango. Whether Nacho was going to go it alone or not is debated. His death, however, many do attribute to El Chapo due to paranoia. However, what Chapo didn't realise, if he did off Coronel of course, was this inadvertently would lead to the creation of CJNG, particularly if Coronel never planned to desert Sinaloa. On the 28th of October 2009, the Milenio Cartel's top leader, Oscar Orlando Nava Valencia, aka El Lobo, the Wolf, was arrested. On the 6th of May 2010, his brother, Juan Carlos El Tigre, was also arrested. 2 months later, Coronel was killed in a shootout with the Mexican army. Following their downfalls, the Milenio Cartel began to rupture, and El Mencho tried to take over its leadership structure. One sect within the Milenio Cartel wanted to appoint Elpidio Majaro Ramirez, aka El Pilo, as the leader of the group. However, others, including Eric Valencia Salazar, one of the key members of the Valencia family, wanted Mencho to take control. There was no room for negotiation or compromise. After some of Mencho's foot soldiers were killed, Mencho gave an ultimatum to those within the Milenio organization who were against him. Hand over Gerardo Mendoza, who allegedly orchestrated the killings, or there will be hell to pay. Naturally, those against Mencho did not accept this request, which kick-started the Milenio Civil War. The Milenio Cartel split into two. One side was known as La Resistencia, the Resistance, led by El Pilo, whereas the other side were Los Torcidos, the Twisted Ones, led by Mencho. Mencho would go on to win the Civil War, and he absorbed what was left of the Milenio organization, as well as the Matazetas, after Coronel died. The organization would be swiftly rebranded the New Generation Jalisco Cartel, CJNG, and of course the rest is history. Again, one could argue that Chapo's act of paranoia over Coronel, in some ways at least, led to the creation of CJNG, who obviously have been the main rivals of the Sinaloa Cartel for over 10 years at this point. Fast forwards years later to more recent times, we may be seeing the same behaviours from Chapo's sons, Los Chapitos, who seem more interested in growing their own influence and power, more so than maintaining the Sinaloan Federation. They essentially want their own Sinaloa Cartel, not including the likes of Ismael Zambada. We have seen Los Chapitos defy others in the Sinaloa Cartel time and time again. They went against longtime family ally Damaso Lopez. They defied Mayo Zambada's advice not to get involved in the trafficking of fentanyl because of the heat that it caused the organisation due to the significant amount of overdose deaths in America that was swiftly becoming mainstream news and a political talking point. Eventually, Los Chapitos would go on to betray Zambada himself, orchestrating his capture by US authorities. The history lesson is to show that the Sinaloan Federation is no more. It's no longer a horizontal leadership structure, instead, it's a group of warring factions with the winner aiming to seemingly become the one true boss, and as of right now, many speculate that Mayito Flaco, the son of Mayo Zambada, and his group La Mayiza, are in pole position to win the war. As I speculated a few weeks ago, a man named Fausto Isidro Meza Flores, aka Chapo Isidro, may be a pivotal figure in this war, depending on his decision. He leads a group in Sinaloa called the Guasave Cartel, and he has been growing in influence in recent years due to the uncertainty within CDS. In recent days, the news is official that he has sided with Mayito Flaco and La Mayiza. This could be huge going forwards, so watch this space. But anyway, in recent days, a couple of nasty videos have made the rounds, grim and brutal byproducts of the Civil War, and today we will explore them. But nevertheless, what happens in the actual videos? The first video is 2 minutes and 10 seconds in length, and it was recorded on the 7th of May during the spike of violence in Sinaloa State. Allegedly, the killers belonged to La Mayiza, and the victims were accused of being associated with Los Chapitos. The video is filmed at night, and the scene actually takes place on a road. As you play the clip, you are met with the sight of several captives, laying on the road. There look to be 8 in total. The person filming walks over to the victims, making sure they are all on camera. Then he walks over to a shirtless captive, who is slightly separated from the rest of them, and he gives him several hard kicks all over his body, causing the victim to shout in pain. Eventually, this captive is forced to lay with the others. For a while, sicarios just intermittently kick them. At this point, a civilian riding a motorcycle actually drives and reaches the scene, and the sicarios let him through so he can go on his way. It's a stark reminder of what some people have to live around. Once the motorcycle has driven off, the sicarios resume to setting the scene, so to speak. One hitman uses a spray can to write something in white paint on the road, probably a threatening narco message. At this point, a hitman with a knife then approaches the shirtless captive who was previously beaten, and he uses said knife to seemingly carve a message into the man's back. This causes the captive to scream in pain. Once the message has been written out on the road and carved into the victim's back, the sicarios back off, assault rifles in hand, and much like a firing squad, they light up the captives, shooting countless times, killing them probably instantly. The video ends there. The next clip is, I'd say, much more like your traditional cartel video, utterly brutal. Once again, it is seemingly a clip perpetrated by La Mayiza. Again, the victims allegedly belonging to Los Chapitos. Having found a translation of the speech in the clip, there isn't anything too interesting to report, just your usual cartel rhetoric. This is going to happen to all of the Chapos, bitches, that sort of thing. The video itself is 2 minutes and 4 seconds in length, and it has been recorded in the middle of a forest. As you play the video, you are met with a sight of one of the captives. He's a young man, probably in his late teens to early 20s, and he's kneeling on the ground with his hands tied behind his back. He's already bleeding from the arm and he looks dishevelled and beaten. A sicario is holding him by the hair, forcing him to look at the camera while asked questions, seemingly by the person filming. After a few seconds, the person who is grabbing the victim's hair then leans over into shot, and he is carrying a combat knife, and he begins to slice the victim's throat, directly on the Adam's apple. Interestingly, the hitman isn't wearing a mask, and his face is clearly visible. The hitman takes his time, seemingly not rushing it on purpose, and gently slides the knife across the windpipe over and over, causing the victim to clench his teeth, but somehow he doesn't scream. Eventually, he drags the captive down so that he is laying on his back, also giving the sicario better leverage to cut. He puts more pressure on the blade as he slices, and this cuts directly into the victim's windpipe, possibly even cutting into the vocal cords, as at this point, the victim motions with his mouth like he's trying to scream, but no sounds come out. The hitman then cuts on the left side of the neck, and at this moment, you see that he hits the carotid artery, and blood suddenly shoots out, and rapidly at high pressure. At this point, the sicario backs off, and the person filming continues to focus on the victim. Blood is shooting from the wound, and you hear the captive struggling for breath, choking and gurgling on his own blood. The hitman then stomps the victim in the face a couple of times, hard, and the captive attempts to try to sit up, but again he is stomped in the head. The hitman resumes to using the knife, now slicing far more aggressively into the neck. It causes the victim to seize up, probably because the blade is hitting the spinal cord. At this point, something happens that I've never seen before. As the victim tries to breathe, you see what I think is the Adam's apple protrude from the deep gash in the victim's throat. It's like a white ball. It's utterly gruesome and bloody at this point. The sicario then decides to hack through the spinal cord instead of slicing, causing wet thudding sounds. The focus in the victim's eyes are completely gone. No life left in them, though his body still tries to breathe. Eventually, the spinal cord is severed and the victim is beheaded, though the final part of the beheading is done off camera. The video jump cuts, and it now shows another sicario killing a second captive, again another young man, this time with a pistol. He simply walks up to the victim who is laying on the ground and shoots him in the head. Despite getting shot in the head, the victim actually moves for a short while, causing the sicario to walk back over again, point the gun at him, but he doesn't shoot. The other sicarios tell him no, 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 possibly due to the noise caused. The person filming then walks over to the man who was shot in the head. He is lying next to the beheaded victim, and he still tries to breathe, despite the bullet to the head. Every time the man exhales, blood shoots out of his nose, and the noises are similar to that of a beheading, the gurgling blood, etc. The person filming then goes back and forth, focusing on the beheaded victim, then the victim who was shot. He spots something that makes him laugh. The person who was beheaded, his warm blood is actually causing evaporation mist as it is exposed to the cold night air. The video ends as the person filming stands on the shooting victim's face, cussing him out as he still tries to breathe. The video ends here. So there we have it, a quick update in regards to the Sinaloa Cartel civil war. This situation shows no signs of slowing down anytime soon, though it does seem that La Mayiza are in the driving seat right now, but again, you can never really write off Los Chapitos, you know, so we'll see how that pans out. But yeah, right now, it seems La Mayiza are in pole position, we shall see. But anyway, guys, thank you for the support, much appreciated. Hit the like, hit subscribe. Links to my Twitch, my Twitter will be in the pinned comments, so if you want to get in touch, please feel free to do so. But anyway, as always, stay safe, and I'll catch you on the next one.